This is Emily Hull from the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. Today is Friday, June 22nd, 2018, and this morning I'm interviewing Sasha Martin in Tulsa, Oklahoma for the Deep Roots Oklahoma Authors Oral History Project. Sasha, you're an accomplished writer, author of the acclaimed memoir Life from Scratch, and a blogger who knows what it means to cook the world. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Born at home close to midnight, and grew up in a lot of places. So I only spent a brief amount of time in Cape Cod. Really was in Boston until I was almost 11, and then Atlanta, Georgia, and then Paris, France, and then Luxembourg. And then came to the U.S. for my education in Connecticut. So yeah, and it goes on, and then New York, and then finally here to Tulsa.
All right, well, let's talk about Boston
Okay.
first. What do you remember about your neighborhood? Maybe favorite markets or restaurants or places that you enjoyed going?
Yeah, so I grew up in specifically Jamaica Plains, which is a small part of Boston. It was at the time pretty run down. You know, we had there were cars that zoomed by with loud music, and had to be careful. But yeah, I grew up. My mom kind of gave us a lot of freedom, so I would play outside across the street at a park all day long, and then come back in to eat. But we would also we didn't have a super reliable car, so we walked a lot, and we would walk into downtown Jamaica Plain and go to the health food store or go to Brigham's or to get ice cream or lime rickeys. Raspberry lime rickeys were, you don't see those much anymore, but a favorite thing. But then on the really fun days, we would go into the North End, which is the Italian neighborhood, and I'm part Italian, part Hungarian, and then half on my father's side, I don't know. But we would go into the North End and we would get Italian food, cannolis, and like these amazing Italian subs. And so kind of exploring the food of Boston from my childhood perspective, it was kind of an adventure. Yeah. And then we'd go to dance festivals like international folk dancing and eat food there that was new to me. And my mom was always bringing those experiences out of the home into the home, sort of as a single mom or entertainment. So we would make really elaborate dishes that nobody needs to make because she didn't put the TV out, she kept it in the closet and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was back and forth in and out of the home with food. Yeah.
What's the first thing that you remember making with your mom in the kitchen?
The first thing, gosh, that's a good question. It's like the cooking was always there.
Like pasta, your own noodles, or
yeah, I mean we did pasta, but we also did like she would make things like stuffed cabbage. The Hungarian side of her was also very strong. So chicken paprikash with you would roll it up in crepes and bake them and have sour cream on that. She would also do ravioli. Homemade apple pie was a really common thing that she liked to make. There was always something, but then she would make things like kidneys or a liver. I don't know what it was, but we didn't want to eat it. I knew that. Yeah.
So tell me more about your mom. How would you describe her personality, for instance?
So my mom, growing up, was really creative, really passionate. She would find a way to entertain us with, like, she was on food stamps and trying to take care of us and somehow make money, and so she was always finding a way to make that all work. So whether it was having us make that German tree cake, 21 layers of broiled crepe-like marzipan cake as a rainy day activity. Doing stuff like that was sort of, people would think, what is somebody on food stamps doing making a cake like that? Because you have to buy the almond paste, you have to buy the chocolate, you have to get the almonds. None of these things are eminently affordable. Yeah. But the way she saw it, she just didn't think the way other people thought. She had a different sort of like common sense in her, was very strong, but it was not mainstream. And so she thought there was real value in making a recipe like that. And so, but where it became a problem was that because her ideas of the world were sort of not mainstream, she came up against different authority figures. So she had an argument with my brother. He stormed out of the house. He was mad. He sat on the curb in his socks in the winter. And she said, well, he'll come in when he cools off. Very logical, very fine. But, you know, of course, somebody drove by and saw that and wondered about the decision. And because she was also very emotional when confronted, and it didn't have a support system, that would often end up in, you know, that's where the foster home started and the removals, because she just didn't agree with mainstream society. And that was also the era in Boston when, I mean, there's newspaper articles about how trigger happy they were with removing kids from the home. I guess it was a period of time where they felt like that was the thing to do to help. So anyway, overall, I think what she provided me with as a mother, despite all her shortcomings and, you know, the challenges she had, she helped me see the world through a different lens and to not always feel like I have to do what everybody else is doing. That, you know, that there's another way. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great way to put that. So you mentioned how creative she was, and if you read the book Life from Scratch, you can see immediately that this is an extremely intelligent, creative person, and my goodness, I wish I could have made some of the things that she did. So what were she had a lot of interests and talent. She could sew well. Is that right? What does she like to do? Like, maybe not during that time she's trying to take care of 2 kids, but what does she like to do for fun? Or does she still sew?
Well, I have to be honest, we're not in touch right now.
Oh, okay.
So when I met the deadline on the book, which was 2014, she started to go through some changes, which I talk about in the book, that when we moved in with our permanent legal guardians when I was almost 11, she was out of touch, really. Yeah. And that's happened again in the sense that I don't like to name what's going on with her exactly, but the project, while she was super supportive of me writing the book and sharing all these childhood things, was also emotionally challenging for her. And so she helped me remember dates, and she helped me, you know, her biggest complaint while I was talking to her over the phone about the book and sent her drafts of it, her biggest complaint was that I had her age in there and I needed to take it out. So like the whole process was really lovely and cathartic for us to go over some of these things. But by the time I hit my deadline, she had started dropping people out of her life. And I think it was a trigger for her, and she was getting scared. And so the last time I spoke to her was when I reached my deadline, and then she has been, as far as I understand it, doing what she did, like when she went to Samoa in the book, she has run. And so she's gone to Italy, to the Vatican, she's gone to India, she's gone to, I think Abu Dhabi or Dubai, which I know are very different, but that's what she does when things get hard, and this book coming out was hard for her. And so what has happened, I know this doesn't answer your question about what she's doing now, but I guess it kind of does. What happened was when the book came out, I had written a story of healing about mothers and and my mother and me as her daughter and me as a mother with a daughter, and I had to suddenly question everything I wrote and wonder, was it true? If she's gonna disappear again, is it all still true? And happily, after some really serious thought, I do think it's all true. And I do, I talk at the end of the book about, there's the feast, and I'm watching her, and I'm watching these kids and what she would say about them piling their plates high, and that let them, that they're hungry, let them fill their plates and all that. And realizing that she just is who she is, and that I love her anyway. And so that's where I am with, some people, you can have a traditional relationship, but with her, she's a little bit like the wind, she comes in and she comes out. So it's hard. Yeah. But yeah.
So when you were a child, what were your favorite books?
Well, as a kid growing up, I definitely went into imaginary worlds a lot. So I loved Chronicles of Narnia. I read those several times. I would read things like, some of these Arthurian legends written in modern times. And actually, by the time I went to college, I studied medieval French Arthurian legend. I took many classes with one professor who was really interested in that research, and so I kind of got even deeper into this fantasy world. But that's where it started with some of those kind of books.
Before we started the interview, you were showing me some books about fairy tales.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I've always found fairy tales and legends and this kind of thing really fascinating and transformative and transport you as well. And so I remember, I guess this wasn't when I was a kid, but when I got back in touch with my mom after living with the Guardians, she was, or was it when I was a kid? I don't know. But there was this book about, by Tolstoy, and it was I think it was Tolstoy, and it was all these fables for children, and they were awful. I mean, they were about these children that followed this kitten to a train track, and then the kitten got hit by a train. Maybe I dreamed all this.
That sounds about right.
But they were awful, and I remember thinking, whenever I was that I encountered this, I remember thinking that that what was amazing, and that was the first time it really hit me, is that fairy tales are telling us what to watch out for. Mm-hmm. They're ways to teach our kids how to be safe in the world, and that depends on the world you live in. And so I think for me, being in and out of foster homes and being with legal guardians, these stories of like Hansel and Gretel who are sent off by their parents, sent away, and they have to survive. Or, even Arthurian legend, it's developed a lot over the years, and the medieval stuff is very different than the modern stuff. But this idea of, pulling a sword from a stone, not believing in yourself, and then being told, no, you are here for a reason. I think all those stories really resonated with me and my question of like, why am I even here if people keep passing me around and don't want to raise me? Which, of course, it wasn't that clear in my head as a kid, but that was the feeling, is like, gosh, what is my place in the world? And those stories really address that, and the idea that there's something spiritual or supernatural or larger than life in the world. Of course, it's called a fairy tale because people don't believe it's true, but I do think there is something in the world that connects us all, and there is some sort of something that binds us that's super that we can't touch or see, I guess. I don't know. And so those stories bring that out for me, even if they're all from our minds, right?
Yeah.
So.
So when you read, do you read fairy tales with your daughter?
Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself rewriting them or retelling it in a different way? Or do you go by the original version and talk about that? Some of them can be pretty intense.
They can be, and what's interesting, that's something my mother had a really strong opinion about, which was, again, that brutal common sense that she has. I had a version of The Princess and the Pea that was a modern retelling, and it shows this prince, and he's a boy. He's like 11, and he's looking for, or maybe he's older, but he seems it's a cartoon. The illustrations are kind of cartoons, and he keeps meeting all these snobby princesses who are very upset that they're sleeping on this frozen pack of peas, and they come across as prissy. And he found his friend Pippi. She sleeps on the camping mat, and she finds the bag of frozen peas, and she thinks, how great, I'll put it on my soccer wound. So she's like this athletic girl, and she is practical, and so he realizes she's the one for him. And my mom read the story, and she said, this is awful. And I said, really? Because I thought it was really neat to see this, version, this empowered girl who was cool and fun, and they were friends, and that's why they got together. It wasn't some like disconnected relationship. And she said, no, the point of The Princess and the Pea is that and she's like talking like this, like really intense. She goes, is that if you're gonna be a leader, somebody in power, you have to have the perception to notice when something even as small as a pea is out of place. You have to be paying attention. And I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant.
I haven't thought about it like that.
It's not about being prissy, it's about being perceptive. And anyway, some of the modern retellings, because of my mom's influence, actually irritate me because they soften too much of what the original point was. Now, like if you ever read the original Little Mermaid story, that one's very different. She turns to foam, and I think the idea that the consequences to our actions, that there are consequences, and that it does matter, and that you can't have everything. You can't be on land and be with your family and sacrifice your voice for a man. Maybe they weren't, the original story wasn't meant to be that feminist, but that will turn you to foam, and that's an important message. Now we have these happy endings. I don't know. How does the movie end? I don't know. But
and the way it's retold, my little one has seen the movie and has the.
Do they get together? I can't even remember.
Yeah.
They do, right? Yeah.
And then she's 4, but I still have a discussion with her.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have to give up everything with the end goal to change from a mermaid to a human, to ride off into the sunset, to be.
And that was the power of that terrible ending.
She lost all of her power, really. And
yeah.
Left everything she knew and who she was behind.
Yeah.
I couldn't see them again.
Yeah, it's really. I have the Hans Christian Andersen book, and I read it to my daughter, and she said that when she was older, and she's 8, almost 9 now, and she just thought it was so sad, and we just talk about, I talk about The Princess and Pea, the 2 stories. I didn't get rid of the modern book, and we talk about, what is more true with The Little Mermaid. So I don't let go of the modern, but I don't let go of the past either. I give her both, and so we have those talks now that she's a little older. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, so I have a problem with what we're doing now with stories, that we're sheltering our kids so much. Sometimes things are bad, and sometimes your actions can really hurt you, or somebody else's actions can really hurt you. Sometimes parents do send you off into the woods, and how are you gonna survive that? Anyway.
Yeah, and that kind of relates to my next question. So you mentioned earlier that you had spent some time living in Paris and Luxembourg and people want to know all of the reasons why that was, they can read your book. You mention it. You mentioned it there, but what I wanted to focus on was the moments you had in Europe, in Paris, in Luxembourg, where you had a chance to establish or reestablish your relationship with cooking and with food, and with bringing people together. I think there was a moment where you had a bunch of friends over, or something like that.
Yeah, so living with this new family, it was just for context. In my mother's home, we had no money, but cooking was a way to express ourselves.
Yeah.
And in this new family, kids weren't in the kitchen. It wasn't allowed. And so, but there was a lot of money. And education was the thing that they encouraged. And spending money to make sure I had a good experience in the summer. And I don't say that doesn't sound very nice, but I mean it with love, is that they really gave me every opportunity except in the kitchen, because I didn't know how to ask, and it wasn't in their family something you did to bond. And so I had to look outside of the house in Paris and in Luxembourg. And I was there in Europe from the age of 13 to 19. And in that time, of course, you don't normally have access to any sort of, maybe you have babysitting money if you're lucky. So I would go to in the beginning, when I was younger, I would go to the boulangerie and the fromagerie and just try things and spend money on things. I also, I don't think it made it in the book, but I also did things like I went to McDo, which is McDonald's, and get like the ice cream sundae and dip fries in it. I was a kid, right? But I loved going to the bakeries, and we would buy a baguette after school and share it with friends. And I think that exploration, it doesn't seem like a big deal now that in America we have so much more access to interesting kinds of bread. It's not just Wonder Bread and whatever. Like, really, it's becoming easier to access those things. But when I was there, it was just totally new for me to try, a chocolate croissant or some of these other things. And then as I got older, when I was in Luxembourg, my guardian mother left for 6 months, and so she was the one in the kitchen. And when she was gone, my guardian father and I had to figure out how, food, and he was a lot more relaxed than she was about the kitchen. And so we started a cooking club. I think it was my senior year or junior year. It's in the book. I thought harder about it then. But anyway, we took turns, each of us kids, and we made a meal and invited the friends over, and we set up the table and made it nice, and had a really good time. And when I had my turn, I made homemade pasta from scratch with Alfredo sauce, and got sangria and all this stuff, because we were drinking at a young age. But it was like I had been bottled up for almost a decade, it felt like, and here was an opportunity that I was allowed to get in the kitchen, and I could cook for some people I loved. And so it wasn't enough to just buy something and serve it. I had to, I could have made pasta by boiling water and pre-bought pasta, but I was like, no, I'm gonna get my hands dirty. I'm gonna make the hardest thing I can think of, right? And it was connecting me to that Italian heritage, growing up. So it felt like I was bridging back to some things that I was just really homesick for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And speaking of your the Italian side of your family, what was it like cooking in the kitchen with your extended family? In my mind, I'm comparing some scenes from your book with that to how kind of quiet and could be kind of close off in a way the kitchen was with your guardian.
Yeah.
Family.
Well, the Italian kitchen was noisy, and there was yelling and pot slamming, but it was just especially I have a passage in the book talking about when my mom was a kid in the kitchen, and it felt like I put all this audio in the description because it just sounded like like an orchestra in my head, the way she was describing like all the things happening, you know, the pot bubbling and the lid slamming and this one yelling and in Italian, and because she didn't understand it, it's all just noise, you know. And I didn't, and for me, when I would visit those kitchens of the cousins and things, I didn't understand it either, and so it was very exciting. It felt alive in that kitchen, and it felt like it had a heartbeat, where I don't know, you just knew when you were in that in those kitchens that something good was happening, and it was a way, it was like an extension of communicating. You know, if I'm in a space with you, I cook with you, we do this together. This is an extension of love. It's an extension of relationship. I don't know. So so in that other kitchen, when it was, you know, she made beautiful food. I mean, really talented cook, my guardian mother, but it was, you know, it was her in the kitchen listening to NPR, you know, Prairie Home Companion or something. And I don't know if, you know, if I remember she felt like if I ever brought it up a little bit, she's like, you need to focus on your studies. That's what your job is to become educated. And I don't know if she had a little bit of, you know, defensiveness, maybe a little bit about being a homemaker. I'm a homemaker and a writer, so you know, I'm in the same position she is. But when her kids were growing up, and even when I was with her, that was the boom of women going to the workplace. And so I don't know, you know, I can't imagine in her head what was happening, but I think she was deciding for me that I was going to follow that path instead of her path, I guess. And that's what she had kind of done with her kids too.
Even in an expat community, where spouses who may have had jobs before maybe couldn't have a job, you think she still kind of felt like that, or maybe it was a way of escape?
To go in the kitchen. Well, I don't think it came from I never really thought it came from a mean place. I think it came from like, this is my duty, this is my job, and I'm here to provide for you, and your job is to get an education. And I think in the expat community that became very lonely for her, because she really didn't get out. Not that a career would have necessarily, I mean, people can be lonely in a career too, but I think she became isolated after a while, after enough moves that the kitchen became a little bit too much of a retreat. Then, you know, maybe volunteering out in the community might have helped bridge that loneliness a little bit. But I don't think it felt, to be clear, like it felt painful for me, but I don't think she was trying to inflict pain.
Right.
Yeah. It's just what she knew. And I know some things about how she grew up that made it hard for her, that I just felt like really it wasn't my place to put in the book. But she did have to care for her father from a very young age, and so I don't think she saw taking care of the home and cooking, you know, something she did as a young person, you know, as a young teen, all the way until she left the house. That was probably a real drag for her. And so I think that was part of what was influencing, like, she was saving us from something that was really painful for her as a kid.
Yeah, it's just funny how the kitchen and cooking can illuminate all of these different things.
But we all have to eat 3 times a day if we're lucky.
Right. Yeah. So tell me about your educational path after high school. You moved back to the States, and we're in Connecticut.
Yeah, I got my bachelor's at Wesleyan University in 2002, and then after that I worked for a year or 2 years, I guess, and then I decided in 2004 to go to the Culinary Institute of America, and I did the first year of that and came here for my externship at Bama Pie, and then never left. I decided not to go back to finish that program.
Yeah, so, we'll get back to that, but tell me about the Culinary Institute. What was your experience like there?
I love that place. First of all, getting there, it really was, it felt like a fantasy. It felt magical because it's such an inspiring place. The building is gorgeous. It used to be a Jesuit monastery or seminary, or I forget exactly, but there's stained glass and there's domed ceilings, and each kitchen is totally different with beautiful smells coming out from under the door. So going there was really eye-opening and inspiring. And it was also very different from any cooking experience I'd had before. As a kid, it was, my mom, it was creative, but it was a free spirit thing.
Yeah, she didn't follow recipe cards or things like that.
Not really, no.
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing much of that. I mean, I'm sure maybe once in a while, but yeah, she cooked from memory and by feel. And then, of course, in Europe, I wasn't cooking much, but I was experimenting when I could at the end. And then at Wesleyan, I studied the history of artisan bread making in France, and that's what I wrote my thesis on. So that was when I started the academic study of food, and I led a tutorial on medieval cooking. So that's where it kind of the seed started.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got to the CIA, what was different was sort of the exacting professional tone of things. It was like it raised the bar much higher, and but there was also a really fun common sense threaded through, because really at the CIA it's almost less of a recipe and more of a formula that you might follow. So it is kind of intuitive. They're trying to teach you intuition to some kids who maybe don't have it. But I remember, like in Cooking 1 or Skills 1 class, the chef, trying to figure out if we're learning to make the best mashed potato, and you're trying to figure out if your potatoes are cooked enough to mash them. And I don't know where he was from, but he had an accent. And somebody would ask him, is this the texture I'm looking for? And he said, bite on it. He was saying it with some accent. Bite on it. It's done if you bite on it and it tastes done. It was like, again, with the common sense.
Yeah.
They don't want you to have a timer in a professional kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it was kind of similar to my mother, but they have that history of experience and tried and true methods. So it was really mind-blowing. I talk in the book about learning to cook an omelet in 90 seconds from cracking on, the food to putting it on the plate to the person.
So you really do flip it?
No, didn't do that method.
No,
it's a whole nother thing.
Did you flip something?
You kind of scramble it to a point, like very wet, and then you smooth out the top, and then you fold over. You put it in a filling if you have it. Fold over, and then you flip it and you tuck under. It's a little fiddly, the last part. I don't really do it that way anymore. I don't know why they had us do that, but so it was kind of, and they didn't want any color on the omelet, no browning, so it had to be perfectly, golden. Oh, not golden, like just egg color, perfect, no brown. So it was hard, but I liked all that. I liked the challenge. Yeah.
Could you specialize in something? So you ended up doing your externship at a bake.
At Bama Pie in the R&D lab.
Yeah.
So that was research and development. It's called doing product ideation, trying to come up with new concepts. Mm-hmm. And then there were scientists there who, if a concept became used or wanted by some place, then they would modify the recipe to make sure it was food safe in many, many conditions. So
Tulsa.
Yeah.
What was that like moving here, and what did you expect to find?
It's funny, I went to cooking school with a kid who had been to Tulsa, and the only thing he told me about was, well, there's this place called Turkey Mountain, and there's a place you can go parking if you find anybody to hook up with. I was at cooking school with a lot of young, 19-year-old boys, and I was in my mid to late 20s, or mid 20s, I guess. So I was a little bit in a different place than they were. So that was the one thing I had heard about Tulsa. And I thought, well, that doesn't really apply. So, I came in July and it was hot. That was my first impression, was the heat. And for a while, I really just threw myself into my work. and was traveling for work at Bama as well. But really when I started to get to know Tulsa and kind of get out of that bubble was when I decided to stay, which was, it was a 3-month externship, and I decided that if I could find a job before Christmas, I would stay, and I did. And so the thing about Tulsa for me that really stood out is that I talked fast in contrast. I guess New England, I don't know where it came from, but I realized everybody was talking a little bit slower, like more measured. That was one thing. The other thing I noticed was that people were quick to say things like I love you, and I don't mean in a romantic sense, but like in a friend sense, that people were quick to be very warm, very kind. Grocers would talk to you when you checked out in a very chatty way. This was all really strange to me. But at the same time, this warmth that just was every day didn't translate necessarily to making friends quickly. So it was strange. I thought everybody's being so warm, but I don't feel like I know anybody. Yeah. Whereas in New England, nobody's very nice. Grocers don't. I mean, I'm stereotyping, but like it's a people talk fast. People are busy. They're not making small talk so much at all. But when you make a friend, you know you have a friend, but because everybody here is so loving, you're like, who's my friend exactly? So that was like interesting as I became a new resident and started to form friendships, all those questions came up. But that warmth and that kindness, really, I loved it, I just really loved it. And the other thing, as I became established here over the years, is that I learned that there's so much less cynicism in Tulsa than in New England. So, in the big cities, everybody's busy, everybody has things to do, they've seen it all, it's been done before. Whereas it feels like here in Tulsa, if you have an idea, there's somebody who's going to be enthusiastic about that idea, and they're going to help you. And it's sort of a, small town mentality in a city. And it's really amazing because a lot happens. There's a lot of good energy around that, I don't know. So I think it's a wonderful place to be a creative person compared to, like if you try to go to New York City and make it happen, a lot of people do that, but it feels so, from the outside to me, very cutthroat, and it's not cutthroat here.
So how did you meet people and make friends and start to feel like you were really part of the community and connected to people here?
I mean, it happened little by little with jobs that I worked. I worked a few different jobs in marketing and design and grant writing before I had my daughter. And then when I had my daughter, that's when I became, I did the blog and cooked every country and started doing some freelance food writing a little bit and all that. So in each job I would meet people, but I don't think I really had a super close knit group of people I was counting on a regular basis until I had my daughter and I started to make friends through that phase of life. That's when I really, and then Cooking the World, really started to get to know people because I had questions and I needed to find things. So I got to know Tulsa in a whole new way. But it's just by living life. I guess that's the short answer. Yeah. And bumping into different groups of people, and then I did, like when I was pregnant, I joined a writers group and started going there twice a month, meeting people that way. And I've tried different writers groups over the years. That's been kind of a neat way to meet people who don't necessarily think like you, but have an interest. You know what I mean? So, but you still have that one common interest, which is writing. Yeah.
So how about meeting your husband?
Yes.
That was a good story.
Well, so gosh, I mean, I had been dating somebody, that's like, they're gonna have to read the book, but I came to Tulsa brokenhearted, and part of this person I used to date was that I would ride on the back of his motorcycle. And when I came to Tulsa, I was grieving that 3-year relationship, and so I thought, well, I wanna sort of stand up on my own 2 feet. And part of that desire was, oh, I'm gonna ride a motorcycle instead of being behind on somebody else's bike. I'm gonna ride my own. And so when I was at CIA, I had spent some money and taken some lessons, and then when I got here, I hadn't even decided to stay yet, but I guess in my heart of hearts, I must have known because I bought a motorcycle. And I was like, I'll figure out how to get it back to New York later. So I bought this motorcycle, and I started Googling around about, or vice versa. Anyway, I found a community of sport bike riders, and my husband had started the website. And so I met him at meetups and things like that, and really immediately when I looked at him, I felt like I had come home. Just like there's something in his eyes, but it took another year before we figured all that out. But yeah, and now neither of us are riding.
Oh yeah, yeah. Ask about that.
Yeah, well, for me, as soon as I was pregnant, I decided to stop, and then him, it took a little longer, but it's a hobby that takes a lot of time, and it's not really family oriented. Yeah. So I don't know. And for me, I think it was, I don't think for him, but for me, I think it really was a phase of life where I was trying on how it felt. Like I was pushing back against some pain I had. And so I was feeling what that felt like to be, the driver of my life, right? Like in the front of all that. And I think in the end, ultimately, I realized I'm not a thrill seeker.
Yeah.
And I have a little too many fears to be on a bike. So,
you did it. The roads are open.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was cathartic, and it was a wonderful phase of life. And it's how I met my husband, which of course is really the point of it all. Is if I hadn't had that time, I wouldn't have met him. So, yeah.
So, let's talk about your blog. What did you call it, and how did you get the idea to cook the world?
Yeah, so it was called Global Table Adventure, and the idea. So it's kind of like tied into motherhood. When my daughter was 6 months old is when I started it. So she was just starting out on solids. And I wasn't cooking anymore. And that, as we've talked about my history with food, that was really strange. But I don't know what was going on with me, but I was just really trying to figure out motherhood. And I think I was afraid for my daughter. I think I the childhood I had in and out of foster homes, and then the state of the world, which is always, the news always has something depressing. I just didn't know how to raise her without the solid foundation that the way I grew up wasn't a solid foundation. So I think part of not cooking was just a symptom of this anxiety I was feeling. And so my husband had bought me these French square spice jars as sort of a gift. I had seen them and I wanted them, and he ordered them for me as a gift, and they sat unused. And I remember one night I couldn't sleep, and I walked into the kitchen and I was looking at them, and I was imagining sort of, I guess, filling them with something different, because so much of the foods of my childhood were tied in with pain. The pain of a single mom on welfare and being in a foster home or being with guardians that, away from everybody, like so much pain when I would look and think about all these food memories, because food is your life, and it was all messed up. So I was looking at these jars and thinking, like, gosh, what if when I sprinkled seasoning on my food, it wasn't all this sadness, but I was creating something new I could put in there. And I talk about Marcel Proust and his Madeleine, and he dipped that in this lime concoction And when he ate it, it flashed his childhood back. And I think what I was talking about is I wanted to create my own flash, something new, something different, so that when I would eat these spices or eat this food, and I wouldn't have that pain that came flooding back. I'd have something else coming back, and I wanted to invent what that was. And so I thought, well, what could I put in there that I haven't had? And I thought, well, what if I could cook the world? I don't know. It was just like this moment where it's like maybe all the food needs to be in there. And so anyway, that was the idea. And I rushed into the bedroom and woke my husband up and told him all about it. And he was like half asleep. But anyway, it was kind of like in the beginning, I thought, well, I don't have a great memory, and I think I had tried blogging before and I never liked it. And the blogs I had started, I probably only kept up with for a month. But in this case, I was like, well, I'm going to go alphabetical, and I want to be able to remember what I did. So I'll write it down. And so it was kind of like more of a log than a journal to me. Like, okay, in that way, if I really like something, I can go back and make it again. And so that's how the blog started. And I put these gemstone stickers on every country after a while, to track our progress and all that. So I started with Afghanistan and went to Zimbabwe, and it took almost 4 years.
And you shop for ingredients around here.
Yeah. In fact, I went through a change in kind of the first year of the blog, where at first because my husband started out really picky, and I was trying to almost shock him into trying new things, and then I realized that that's not actually helpful. And there's a lot of mainstream television that does that, like sort of culinary rubbernecking, like, oh, look at that weird thing that community eats. And I realized very quickly that wasn't kind or conducive approach, especially if you have a picky eater in the house. So I started to look at what I call recipe bridges, which are, we eat potatoes, they eat potatoes. How do they make potatoes? So that you can bring somebody into an understanding of another culture through something that's familiar. And so I started to make recipes that are really approachable. Some of them are hard. I mean, I do like a good challenge, but there's a lot of them that are like, again, here's a different way to make potatoes with a few different spices. There's ones where you cut a wedge of potato and you split it partway down the middle and you stuff it, I think, with lamb, and then you bread it and you deep fry it. Amazing. Then you could, mash it with sweet potatoes and peas and corn, and it's called irio, and it's from, there's several countries that do it, but this part of Africa, the east side. I could go on and on. And so carrot salad is another one. A Mongolian carrot salad, you shred the carrots and you do like garlic and vinegar and a little bit of sugar maybe and a little bit of vegetable oil. But in Morocco, you do the shredded carrot with cinnamon and orange, like fresh squeezed orange and orange blossom water. Totally different taste. Still shredded carrots at the end of the day. So that's how that became my philosophy as the website moved on, is trying to find a way that would excite people, because there is so much beautiful food around the world, and getting people excited to try it instead of that culinary rubbernecking.
And bringing them into it. Would you say that your readership kind of, people who would comment or whatever on the blog, do you think they kind of saw that bridge and appreciated seeing things from that perspective? And then kind of on a related note, people from those countries that you were writing about, did you get people kind of, because everyone has their opinion on food dishes, and you just think you can't make a spaghetti or a lasagna or meatloaf or just something real basic without someone having an opinion on it. But did you have people write into you saying, oh, well, actually in my country we don't do things like this way, or here's a suggestion for you to try?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way I looked at that, probably the best example, and I don't remember which post exactly, but when I cooked Australia, I remember there were 2 commenters, and one commenter said, because I got kangaroo from Harvard Meats on, where is that, like 15th and Harvard maybe, and they said, one commenter said, nobody eats kangaroo. It's like next to the dog food and cat food. That's not Australian. And then somebody else commented and said, I eat kangaroo all the time and I love it. And the way I see it is that's kind of like us with deer, or any kind of venison that, you have people who love it and people who hate it. And regionally, what I found is that I would try to look at enough recipes to see the sense of a thing. So like if you're making, let's just pretend lasagna, which I didn't make, but if lasagna is the recipe, I would try to look at 5 or 6 lasagnas and see what is the essence of lasagna. Okay, we're always going to have noodles, we're always going to have some kind of sauce, we're always going to have cheese layered in there. And then I would give myself permission, once I saw enough variations, to put together what I felt like was a nice version. Because in every home, even in Tulsa, biscuits and gravy, not everybody's making their gravy the same way or their biscuits the same way. And so I had to give myself a little grace there and be like, okay, like if I lived in this country, I also wouldn't make it the same as my neighbor maybe. Mm-hmm. So I tried to do my research and be a responsible steward of, knowing that, especially as readership grew, that there was responsibility there to try to be accurate and considerate in how I represented a place. But I was very careful. At a certain point, I learned not to say a food from somewhere, because that was above my pay grade, mm-hmm. so to speak. Because you can't say hummus is from somewhere without being an expert, and that's probably not true anyway. Like we can't pin it down. There's many countries that enjoy hummus, and so that's just one example of so I would say it is enjoyed in this place.
That's a good way to put that.
Yeah.
Smart. You did have someone from Bulgaria stop by. Can you tell us that? And this happened.
This happened.
This is true.
And so Bulgaria, which the book is now translated in Bulgarian, and I think that's why, is right here on the Black Sea, which is not near Tulsa, Oklahoma, at all. This was always happening and this was the most astounding example, but when I would be making food from a certain place, somebody would show up within a week or two of, not every time, but so many times, show up in my life. And so this was a time my mom was visiting, and we were just hanging out. She was playing with Ava in the living room, and I was at the dining table, and I had all my cookbooks out trying to figure out what to make for Bulgaria. I can't make this stuff up. And the doorbell rang, and my mom goes I'll get it. She goes to the door, and I hear a voice, a young man's voice, and they come in. She brings him in, and I'm like, oh, hi, I don't know who this person is. He's a stranger. Why did she bring him in? She said, Sasha, this is Nick from Bulgaria. And I was like, no. It was. And so he was selling educational books door to door for his summer job. Wow. And yeah, so I said, well, could you tell me something about Bulgarian food? And I said, I have all these books. Do you mind? And he was like, he probably was wondering if we were murderers, inviting him in and all this stuff. We both had to have some trust there. Anyway, he sat down and looked through my books with me, and he said, no, not this. Nobody makes this. This is old fashioned. And he was really, really helpful. And then he said, he pointed out what I should make. And then I remember I felt like, gosh, he spent at least half an hour sitting here with me. I'm going to buy something from him. So I actually have a science book set, like it's at least 6 book set of science books for my daughter that she was tiny at the time. And I thought, we're never going to look at these. But I spent like $200 because I had all this guilt about eating up his time. And she loves science, and she looks at them all the time.
Oh,
so it
wow.
actually is amazing. Yeah, it was really amazing. But anyway, there's a quote I put in the book, I think from Joseph Campbell. But, you know, sort of putting I forget how it goes, but putting yourself in a situation where you start, I don't know, like doors start opening where you didn't know where they would be. And I felt like that was happening all the time. And the more I cooked the world, the more I realized what Tulsa had to offer, you know, and that was like dumb luck that he rang my doorbell. Yeah. But some of them, you know, I mean, I was at a library play group, and I was telling a woman, met another mother, and I said, well, I've got to go cook Finland. Yeah. And I said, I'm doing this thing, and I've got to go make this meal. And she said, oh, I'm half finished. And I was like, no, you're not. No, you're not. Yes. So she came back to my house, and she helped me make pula, this bread that has like, it's almost like cinnamon roll type bread, but it has cardamom instead. It's really, really good. And I don't know, it just kept happening. So it opened my eyes to what an international community Tulsa has, number one, and how close-minded I had been to think it was really all same around me. It was really just about getting out into the community, and sometimes finding these international markets, and realizing that that's all here too, you know, from Latin America to Korean market to a West African market, which is like 2 miles from my house. I had no idea until I was like, oh, I need an ingredient. But I felt like, kind of going back to one of your earlier questions, that if I didn't find the ingredient in Tulsa, I wasn't going to make it, because I wanted it to be accessible to most people in because Tulsa's a small city. So if I couldn't make it here, then I shouldn't make it, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what did you learn about motherhood through the experience of cooking the world, and maybe what are you still learning now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think on a broad spectrum, I learned that, it's going to sound so obvious, but just as I went through all these countries, almost 200 of them, just realizing, without specifically studying motherhood, but looking at recipes, just the impact of, in my brain, somewhere there are people making these recipes for their families all over the world. You know, billions of people are taking time to love their kids the only way they know how, in their homes, right? Just by providing food if they can, right? And so for me, it gave me a set, which is so basic, but it's like I needed to learn that, in a sense, I was connected to that human family, that I was a part of that machine, no matter where I came from, my background, or how hard it was. I was a mother just like the billions of others out there, and I was a part of that. And then the other thing, I think, was just once I felt and recognized my place in the world family, then it was like, it kind of gave me permission to I don't know, to just embrace motherhood in its mess a little bit.
Yeah.
So then what started happening is, I thought I was reaching out into the world to find new flavors and new memories, right, for the spice jars and for my brain. But actually what started happening is, which is human nature, I started making connections to my own life. So I started to reconnect to recipes from my childhood, like, you know, going in Paris and having those baguettes. I made baguettes with my daughter when we cooked France. And so now the painful, lonely memory of being in France, away from my biological family, having solace in this baguette with friends, sort of bittersweet. Now I had this totally sweet memory of making baguette with my daughter, and I owned that memory. And so I actually, in a way that I didn't expect, fulfilled that hope when I was staring at those spice jars. You know, like, Now those memories are imbued with something new. And that happened again and again. And sometimes with countries I had never encountered, their food, but some ingredient would be a distinct memory, like my mom's use of cinnamon. There's a lot of countries that use it as a savory component. And that's, something that was for the most part new to me, and so it just shifted a little. It broadened my understanding of ingredients, but also like my world a little bit. So anyway, yeah, all that that motherhood stuff. When it came down to some of those childhood memories reimagined, probably the most impactful one was the German tree cake, which was that 21 layer one, because while I understood that it was a fun thing to do with my mother as a kid, it always sort of daunted and amazed me, thinking back, like, what was that all about?
Yeah.
When I redid it for when I cooked Germany, it just struck me that this recipe was a walking meditation, or like I talk about it as an edible prayer, because it's almost not about the outcome. It's about that process of painting this batter and then broiling it and painting it and broiling it. And it just came to me to be such a symbol for motherhood, that you're just pushing on, pushing through, and one day at a time. That's how you parent.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh. So I wanted to, I wanted to see what you thought about this quote. It's from MFK Fisher, where she says, "Probably one of the most private things in the world is an egg before it is broken."
Mm.
How do you think that might speak to just the whole process of examining your past and writing this book? How do you think maybe that quote applies to your work?
I don't know. That's so, in a way, there's so many different ways to think about that. It's my first instinct is to think about my sense of privacy, and so to think of myself as the egg,
because it's nonfiction, so there's there's a certain contract you have with readers.
Yeah. Well, and I think the idea of spilling yourself out onto the page, I don't know, it just so that's the way it initially hits me. But then I guess, this is maybe, I don't know how you mean exactly, but this is how I would do it, is that something did change in me when I went from holding my story in my own little world to opening it up. And, the blog really was still very private. I really wasn't talking about myself. Even when a recipe did hit me as connecting me to my childhood, almost never did I talk about that. I was there to log the recipes. And, actually, a lot of the writing in the beginning is pretty inane. It's like, just lighthearted blogging. And over time, I developed an interest in style and whatever. But even by the end, it wasn't private. And so when I started to work on the book, that's when the crack happened, and when I spilled out. And I think it was quite an adjustment to release my story into the world. And people ask, was it cathartic? And I don't think it was. In a way, it was an extension of what I had always done as a kid, like to survive. My friends all knew my story. I was always telling my story to my friend. But what it did was it helped me find the gray area. So when you're a child and you go through a tough circumstance, your brain automatically sorts everything into good and bad. Right. Somebody who's kind to you, somebody who's mean to you. But that isn't how you write a book. You have to find the gray area. And so I had to sit down and really meditate on each person in my life and their actions. And if I thought they were good, I had to think about what was bad. And if I thought they were maybe bad, I had to think about what was good. And it was, I don't know if cathartic's the right word, but it was very eye-opening. And I think it gave me a lot of compassion for each person in my life, because the child is so self-centered by design, right? That's just the way it is. And so I think it really got me out of that victim mode and really understand the complexity. So I don't know what this has to do with an egg, but but that's what happened when I opened it up. And the other thing, and this is getting a little silly maybe, but when you crack an egg, you can then feed somebody, right? Mm-hmm. You're making a dish all of a sudden, and that is consumed. So when I first spoke about my book publicly on book tour, I didn't use the word foster care. I didn't mention suicide. I didn't talk about the things the book was about, because I was terrified and I was afraid of a lot of things. But one of the things I was afraid of is owning my story at its essence. But one time I was sitting on my curb, and this little boy that played up and down the street, he looked kind of glum, and he sat down next to me, and he said he was going to move to California and all this stuff. And I said, "Oh, do you have family there?" And he said, "I used to live there." And then out of nowhere, he said, "I was in foster care when I lived there." And I said, and he was all hunched over and sad looking, and he wouldn't look me in the eye. He looked down at the ground, and I kind of leaned over. He was 10 or 11 years old, I think. And I said, "Hey, I used to be in foster care too." And he sat up a little bit, and he looked at me in the eye again. And it was like I saw in him that recognition that, wow, she's been there too. It was like this little moment where that Me Too changed things for him, because especially in foster care, people don't talk about it. You're shuffled around sort of in the dark, literally in the dark a lot. So you don't realize there's other kids like you. Mm-hmm. And that's what changed. And that was almost a full year after my first book tour. And I think I was maybe even after my paperback tour. I think I blew it all because I was so afraid. But when I looked in that little boy's eyes and I saw his physical change, I was like, what am I doing? This isn't about me naked on stage feeling self-conscious about sharing my story. This is about reaching people like him who grew, but maybe older, who grew up and feel alone still and need to know Me Too. And that changed everything for me. And then it's just like, I don't know. So again, with that egg, I'm now serving my story. It's for somebody else, for their benefit. And it's made it such a better process psychologically.
Yeah. And that's something that maybe in the food writing world, it doesn't get talked about enough, just that emotional component of eating and what we can do with the stories and messages that we have to share with others to connect and, like you said, to feed.
Mm-hmm. And I've had emails from readers. One reader talked about that, that they had a similar difficult childhood, and thank you. But then somebody else said, "I'm a foster mom, and I didn't realize till I read your book that I wasn't loving those kids fully, and now I'm seeing that I was trying to protect myself for when they leave again. But thanks to your book, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to be fully there for them while I have them." And I thought, shit. That's why the book's out there. It's not about me at all. It's about how, so it's really been humbling and wonderful to know that that's happening. Yeah.
Right. So this is a writing question. I'm curious, when did you start thinking of yourself as a writer?
Well, very young, I guess. Mm-hmm. I always loved writing, and my mother encouraged it in me. And I believe I had a poem as a very little girl. Like, I don't know if it was in a little local publication, or it was a magazine. I don't know what it was, but I remember something I wrote was published. And I mean, it could have been in like a church bulletin. I have no idea. But I remember feeling so proud and like, wow, that's possible. That's a thing. And so then as a teenager, I remember all those raw emotions I would spill onto the page. And it was my way of expressing, and it wasn't journaling. I've never really, I wish I were a journaler, but I really don't. I find it kind of boring. And so I have little scraps here and there of journaling, but for the most part, it's poetry is how I get my emotions out. And then I remember being recognized. I did the International Baccalaureate. My English teacher gave me the award for the, probably the most Englishy English student, right? I just was such a nerd, but that's a compliment, right? I just, and come to find out that English teacher, Clark Thayer, who taught me in Luxembourg, lives 1.5 miles from me now.
Oh, no way.
Yes, and I have yet to connect with him. His wife emailed me to say that they came here to retire, and I almost fell over.
Wow.
Yeah, but he really believed in me, and he I remember he was the one that helped like edit some of the work I submitted for my college application. And I remember him making some critique of some of my poetry I was submitting, and it was something about the language I was using. Probably was cloying or something, but he would said it much nicer. And I was not really, but he was trying to be nice, so I didn't really understand what he was saying. And he said, when you're older and you reread it, you'll understand. And I did, and it did.
That's a brilliant way to put that.
Yeah.
How do you think your writing routine has changed over time? When you were writing your blog and your book, I'm sure you had a certain amount of words you needed to get down on the page each day.
The blog was easy in a sense because it never stopped. Yeah. I mean, I was in the beginning, especially, I'd post more than 7 times a week because there was so much content. I was trying to, I was creating a menu page, and I was creating, of course, each recipe, and then I was doing a review of everything, which wasn't about was it good or bad, but just the experience. And I would do an overview of the country. So it was like, it never stopped. So it became just breathing almost. And I really appreciated the structure of going A to Z, because then I didn't have decisions to make or I really didn't want to play favorites. I just wanted to do the work. And then with the book, I only had a year to write. And so it was fast and furious. And because in the beginning, the book contract with National Geographic was about, this happy-go-lucky thing, the misadventures of cooking the world, basically, that all changed when I wrote my first chapter, because she asked me for a little background before I got into it. Why do it? Oh. And so I was like, well, I had a picky husband, and I had some wanderlust living, in the Midwest for the first time and missing travel, and this baby girl I wanted to raise with international perspective. And she's like, no, why did you do it? You were obsessive for almost 4 years. You didn't miss a week. You took it with you when you traveled. That is not normal. Why? And so she said, really dig into it. Well, I couldn't do that. I couldn't say I have a mom, a dad, a dog, and a cat. I had a lot to explain. And so I gave her all these 60 pages or something. And she's like blown away. And she said, this is a lot more than I expected, and it's not enough. I have questions, and this is the real story. So she had to go back to her marketing team, because when they buy a book, they're buying the package, is there an audience for it? Well, now this is a totally different story. So the writing process, to get back to that, I had to throw out my outline, and I had to dig into these really some of them terrible memories, some of them
Yeah.
wonderful, for the first time. And I didn't have time to put on the brakes like you would maybe, because I was under contract with a place that I had a lot of respect and fear for, right? I did not want to disappoint National Geographic. I felt like I was in the big leagues all of a sudden. So I just basically spent, I would say, at least 6 months writing, probably the first time in my life, some journaling. Just total garbage. Just getting it all out and sounding like an angsty teenager. Yeah. And then the process where I talked about finding the gray area, then that's when that started in the next half, where I really then, I had all this stuff. Here's my life. Here's where I think it impacted, me cooking the world. And I had to go back and then find the shape of what I'd written, because it was just a bunch of junk. And some of it stayed and some of it went. And I had to rein in all those feelings, find the gray area. Yeah. But I would write, 5 days a week. I try to do, especially in those first 6 months, I was trying to get volume, word count, try to get as close to 60,000 words as I could, as fast as I could. So I would write at a hotel and write 10,000 words in a night or two, and then not write again for a little bit. Or I would write, I tried to have a minimum of 750 words a day, so that I just knew I was still moving forward. My favorite part of that whole process was the editing in the last couple of months, where it really got down to, draft after draft after draft, and really fine-tuning things. Like, especially the food writing, I would print off the manuscript and I would read it, of course, very fast, because by now I knew it so well, but I would write in big, bold letters all over the manuscript, boring. Anytime I felt like I really could do a better job with this description, instead of just saying we ate ravioli, let's talk about that, right? I don't know if I did that in the book, but anyway, so that was my favorite part, is the revision and really trying to make certain parts of it sing. But my editor was very pragmatic, New York City lady, and so she didn't have a lot of time for sentiment. And I'm very sentimental and romantic. I mean, I love the romantics. Like, I just, so that was good. She brought me a little closer to center on my writing, and a little more, removed some of the heart, but not all of it. So that was fine. Today, my writing process is a little bit different, because I'm not under any, I'm not blogging, and the book I'm writing, I'm on my own deadline for, which is non-existent. So, Yeah. So, what are you working on now that you can talk about? Yeah. Or what do you want to say about that? Well, I'm always doing poetry. That's always been my outlet, more now than for a long time there. I wasn't, I guess, with the blog. I didn't really have time for it. So I'm doing poetry, and then I'm working on a novel, and it's the idea. It started after my last book came out, and I kind of went through a little postpartum after the book was birthed, and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And so I took Elizabeth Gilbert's advice, which was to find your curiosity again. So when she became known for Eat, Pray, Love, she didn't want to write, she didn't know what to write, so she started gardening, and that became the signature of all things. Kind of fed into that. So I took her advice and I started sketching, because I was like, well, I haven't sketched in a while, I'm going to sketch. So I got this sketchbook, it was pretty large, and I sketched a teacup, and it was a really bad sketch of a teacup. But, and then I kept sketching in the book. And then one day I looked back to that first sketch and I thought, well, it's really empty in the center. I could add something. So I started to add this little world inside the teacup, and the steam going up and boats on the steam. And I remember, like, oh, what if there really was a world in a teacup? What would that be like? And that was the start of this novel I'm working on, which is about some children who are out on a homestead, and they end up having a tea party, and one child is lost, and the other two children have to go find the child in this world. And so what happens is you have sort of a Narnia concept but I'm trying to say something about food systems and so instead of teaching kids, like Narnia teaches morals, good and evil, pretty straightforward. I'm trying to teach something about food in a way that's entertaining to YA, maybe middle grade, probably YA. And so they go through these landscapes that are pushed to the extreme as they search for this little boy who's been lost. And what's been interesting is I thought I was writing a fantasy that was getting me away from my memoir. Like I was like, I'm never doing that again. That was so hard, so emotional, so raw. I'm going to do this totally opposite thing, but there's still a little boy who's lost. There's still a girl and her cousin who's looking for him. At this, who knows? It's still in progress, but those are the main things that won't change. And it's kind, and there's food, so it's still my life, but it's not my life at all. I mean, there's wicked characters and all that, so we'll see. I'm kind of holding it close. I haven't even showed it to my agent because I really don't. I don't care if she wants it. I'm writing it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then it'd be great if she wants it and it gets published, fine. But like, this is something I feel called to write. So
yeah. When you have that heat in something in a project you're working on, you just have to go for it.
Yeah.
So, what's your best writing advice? Like best writing advice you could give, or that's been given to you?
Well, a very simple one was given to me after I had the event at Philbrook Museum. So the gal who volunteered the event planning, she said to me, I know you're tired, but when you go home, write down what your impressions were of this before you go to bed. You'll be glad. And she was right. I sat down, I spent 15 minutes, I wrote, the raw emotions of it. And some of that, the scene of the line and the way it was moving and all that, a lot of that didn't really change much in the final book because my impressions were so fresh. The other advice I have is really about sort of mental health and writing, which I don't know that it gets talked about enough. I mean, there's plenty of writers who have depression or who are suicidal or who have committed suicide. And I think it's not just people who write memoirs, of course, but I think there is something really, you're breaking your heart open, that egg, like it is something that does need to be sort of patched up every time. And that process is sort of, the impact of it has to be respected. And I think for me, when I was writing about like my brother's suicide in particular, I really thought I would protect I was like, well, I'm going to write when nobody's home and I'll have privacy and it'll feel safer that way to not have people's eyes on me. It was actually a terrible idea because I had to make it real for the reader. I had to relive it. Right. And so I was triggered again. And I just think, talking about that, about mental health and what we can do to surround ourselves with a good support system, and community, writing community, people who can relate and help you through at home and outside of the home. I just think that's so important. Yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I'm happy to be here. I love, I love the process of being a writer in Oklahoma, and I know that's a lot of what this is about. Is how has Oklahoma had an impact on me, and I just think it goes back to that warm sense of community and sort of can-do attitude that I see here in Tulsa. Is I feel safe to create. I feel safe to try things. That cynicism is not there. So I think that's probably what I would say, is that I'm just grateful to be in that kind of place. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sasha. I appreciate it.
Thank you.